Putin shows a very different tactics, right? He's not so much afraid of the war. He says, well, basically everybody lies. He's not afraid to admit to his own people that he's also a liar. He doesn't avoid the fact that he's a propagandist. But he says, well, I mean, if I'm propagandist, if I admit that, then clearly what West is doing is also probably lies and propaganda. So, so nobody's now building up huge defenses, that would disallow Western news to reach Russian people. They just doubt that this is somehow better. We should take a look at late Alexei Navalny's efforts, exposing corruption. People do understand the symbols when they see a huge palace, that is built with stolen money, where Russian officials, a president lives, and they compare it to their lives. They understand that, and this hurts Putin's image.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. And as part of a series of special interviews for this year's Magnitsky Awards, we're talking to Lithuania's former Foreign Minister, Gabrielius Landsbergis. Gabrielius is a staunch supporter of Ukraine and human rights and will be presented with the award for outstanding contribution to the global Magnitsky justice movement at a ceremony in London next week. Gabrielius, welcome to Frontline. It's great to meet you and congratulations.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here.
The awards are set up in the name of the late Moscow lawyer Sergei Magnitsky, who was thrown in prison, mistreated, effectively left to die after launching a corruption case against Kremlin officials. You introduced the sanctions that were set up in his name in Lithuania. Can you just remind us how these sanctions work and why Lithuania needed them?
Well, first of all, the whole process started even before we initiated the process in Lithuania. I was a member of the European Parliament from 2014 till 2016, and this is where, together with William Browder's assistance, we started the process in Europe, trying to set up a system that would allow to sanction officials, not just from Russia, but basically from any country that is abusing human rights. Using the example of Sergei Magnitsky and what happened to him in Moscow. Later, when I became a member of Lithuania's parliament, also with a more wider and broader processes that we wish to initiate in Europe, we decided to go ahead and start this in Lithuania. And yes, indeed, Lithuania has become one of the first countries to initiate this. To lead the process, and later also, I mean, as I said, happily it all now we have a European Magnitsky sanctions regime, so it allows us to sanction Russian, Belarusian, wherever human rights are abused, and the list is being filled, unfortunately, almost every year. Unfortunately, because I wish there were less abuses globally.
And it means you can target Russian officials, oligarchs and propagandists, those that are involved in supporting the war in Ukraine. What hope is there? And what part do they actually play in that effort? Because so far, Putin is showing no signs of stopping or wanting to do so.
Well, I mean, again, we need to be reminded about the environment that was in 2015 when the whole process started. It was a very different world. Right, so sanctions against Russia in many cases was still a taboo, not like now, right? So now we are talking about 19 packages of European sanctions, United States sanctions, G7 sanctions. So kind of we got used to that more than what was in the past. I have a sense that in 2015 Putin and his circle of oligarchs and supporters, political and business. In business circles, where really they felt that they're immune, right? So that nobody would go against them. They had so many ties to Europe. They had so many ties to the Western world, financial, corrupt ties, that they were sure that that it would be impossible for any parliament to adopt something like this, and the whole process changed that. Of course, I mean, and now with the full-scale invasion till 2022, we already had the instruments that allowed us to do to initiate the processes much faster.
And do you think enough pressure can be put or built either inside or outside Russia to make Putin want to stop?
Well, I mean, it has to complement, right? So it has to be set of measures. And first, I've always was believed that that the most effective way how to defeat an invader, such as Russia, is helping Ukraine to win on the battlefront. And everything else, it complements Ukrainian effort to win that battle. And sanctions is one of the ways how to do it. We're limiting Russian ability to rearm by not supplying it, its weapons and equipment that it needs. We're limiting Russia's ability by not buying their oil, and also putting pressure on the people who surround Putin, so that they start questioning the whole logic of Russia invading its neighbor. So sanctions alone, I don't think that it works just as an instrument, but sanctions together with a number of other elements is incredibly important and needed.
And can you tell me a bit about the movement of Russian opposition activists in exile, some of them who are in Lithuania? How unified are they, in your opinion, in trying to bring about political change inside Russia? Because this community is rumoured to be riven with its own problems of infighting and personal grievances.
Well, I mean, I've always say that it's a very democratic community. That means that there are factions.
Which is why.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not autocratic. There's no singular leader, and we wish that it were, right? But in democracies, let's look at our countries, right? So we don't have one power rule, and it's all for the better. So I think that the deeper problem is that part of Russian opposition is not yet decided where they are on the spectrum between trying to appeal to the imagined Russian voter, which might one day still choose to vote for them if the situation changes dramatically, and being closer to align to the Western values. Right, so and these things apparently still contradict each other, right? So when you sometimes ask the Russian opposition, at least certain people in Russian opposition, who does Crimea belong to, they find it difficult to answer, and that is a bit troubling.
And do you think political change is possible in Russia during Putin's lifetime?
Well, that's a good question. A good way to frame it. I would probably bet that most likely it's after his lifetime. But, and again, I mean, he's not getting younger.
So we spoke to a former director of operations and intelligence at Britain's Secret Intelligence Service recently, who spoke of the need for cognitive operations in Russia to effectively communicate the truth to the public, who are fed a constant diet of Kremlin propaganda. Do you think greater public understanding could really make a difference?
Well, you see, I mean, the times are different than during the Cold War. When you would have something that is a clear lie, the Soviet lie, and then the Western truth. Now Putin shows a very different tactics, right? He's not so much afraid of the war. He says, well, basically everybody lies. He's not afraid to admit to his own people that he's also a liar. He doesn't avoid the fact that he's a propagandist. But he says, well, I mean, if I'm propagandist, if I admit that, then clearly what West is doing is also probably lies and propaganda. So, so nobody's now building up huge defenses, that would disallow Western news to reach Russian people. They just doubt that this is somehow better. Right, so we have to take this into account and probably seek other ways, kind of that the lessons from the Cold War I might not be applicable anymore. But for example, what has been incredibly effective, and we should take a look at late Alexei Navalny's efforts, exposing corruption. People do understand the symbols when they see a huge palace, that is built with stolen money, where Russian officials, a president lives, and they compare it to their lives. They understand that, and this hurts Putin's image within. So if there are ways how we can help those who either uncover, or if we help by providing our information, the one that we have in the West, because still there is ample of that. And bringing that information to Russian public, I think that would definitely help.
I'd just really like to get your perspective on some recent examples of Russians who don't want to fight the war in Ukraine. Who fled to avoid the
Mhm.
draft, and some of them are in Lithuania, but they face being sent back because there's no automatic asylum granted. Do you think it's time to change the law? Because effectively they're being punished for doing something we presumably want them to do.
Mhm. Yes, there has been a rather wide debate in Lithuania and in other Baltic states about how to deal with those issues. Um, my personal view was always that we have to really see what do those people represent, because in some cases a person fleeing the war but then almost publicly cheering the occupation of Ukraine, or walking, or driving with the signs of imperial Russia, that actually might potentially aim even to occupy my own country. I'm not entirely sure that these people should be welcomed in our countries. So we've instituted just a number of very simple tests when they cross the border. We tend to ask them, again, the same question: who does Crimea belong to? And if they are unable to answer this simple question, well, unfortunately, we suggest them still, considering to stay in their own country. If they are able to sign, right, that they are against the war, that they do not support President Putin and his imperial ambition, then maybe yes, maybe something can be looked at.
The Coalition of the Willing was announced in March this year. How effective do you think it's been to date?
Well, they leave more to be desired, I would say. I mean, so far it's very little that has been accounted for, as to what really has been achieved. The goals have been quite ambitious, sending troops to Ukraine. I personally and publicly was very supportive to those goals, but after several meetings, nothing came out of it. And just recently, there was an announcement of the so-called the European Peace Plan. That also came out with the support of the Coalition of the Willing. And honestly, yeah, I find it a bit disappointing, because it admits European failure, it admits Western failure, right? So we negotiate on the basis of already occupied lands, so that we admit that the lands that currently Putin holds, that they would stay within, with him. We admit that this is a reality, and there's nothing else that we can do.
Yeah, I'll ask you a little bit more about that in a moment, but I just wanted to ask you about that peace plan, the 12-point peace plan that's been so much talked about. Do you think it's preoccupying them political minds too much at the moment, when the right focus really should be on really a clear vision, a united vision on how the outcome of the war should look?
Absolutely. I mean, Russia's danger is not going away. Russia is continuing to escalate. And not just within Ukraine, but it's engaged in a horizontal escalation. So targeting European countries, targeting my country, and so many other countries in Europe and NATO. So clearly, I mean, our goal is still, as from the first day, is to win the war, and we have the ability, right? And if we need examples of how to do it, let's look at Ukraine. They were told in February that they hold no cards, but they're still fighting, and inflicting a lot of damage on Russians, Russia, on its invaders. So I'm pretty sure that we still have the ability, to change the course. On this, I'd like to commend the reports that the United Kingdom is continuing to send Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine. They're incredibly useful. I mean, that's a very good example of how to do it.
And you think there is a way if there is a will. And you wrote this week that accepting the current contact line in Ukraine as the starting point for negotiations amounts to a repeat of the Munich Agreement in 1938, when the Sudetenland was transferred to Germany to appease it, only for it to invade and occupy the rest of Czechoslovakia ultimately the year later. What do you think it would look like in the Ukraine scenario?
Exactly, the European plan reminds me of appeasement of 1938. Even though people are telling me, well, we're not recognizing the occupation de jure, it's just de facto. We don't have ability to change the situation now on the ground. Well, okay, then I call it the de facto Sudetenland. That means that we are still trying to appease. We're still not trying to win the war, right? So ramping up Ukrainian ability to strike back has always been the main thing that Ukrainians have asked, and it has been proven the most effective way how to inflict damage on Russia, and probably still the only way how to change Russia's calculations in this war.
The problem is, isn't it, that getting anything done takes so much time, so much discussion, and there's always one country that's against it at least. And the latest efforts to release that 140 billion euros of frozen Russian assets in Europe has failed. It won't be readdressed until December. Why is it taking so long?
Well, I believe that the main problem is that we see threats differently. Countries on the eastern front, eastern flank, call it what you want, but I mean, for us, the threat is existential. It's very real. We understand that if we're not, taking steps, to assure Ukrainian victory, that means that the war very much likely to spread, and then any country in the region might become a next target. So that's why you see us so pushing for more so strongly. And then the further west you go, the less urgency you feel, right? And the countries believe that it's just, one of the political choices that they have, right? So among the social issues, among the, other international problems that arise, and well, there is one more problem, like, the war in Ukraine. So the pyramid is then stacked very differently. And this is what, that we, those who are closer to the war, that we've been always trying to change, to change this attitude.
And how are you doing that? Are you feeling that you're making any headway yourself personally?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, about that. Maybe just adding a voice to a choir of of other people trying to not allow the Western leaders to turn away. I mean, the main voice here is obviously Ukrainian. They've been incredibly successful with this. And especially President Zelensky himself. From the first days of war, when he said that he's not leaving here, he's going to fight, and he's going to rally his people for the war effort, defense effort.
And you say, Ukraine has to be the decider, but at the same time, when you talk about the current line of contact, President Zelensky said recently he would accept it to be kept as it is at the moment as part. And I know that you wrote that you can empathise with somebody after 3.5 years of the full-scale invasion. You're going to get wary. You're going to try and accept what you can. Time is really of the essence here, isn't it? The urgency has to be felt.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and again, from historic examples, I mean, Czechoslovakia also accepted the partition of its lands, right? Even though that it had a 1 million people army that could potentially have withstood the Nazi onslaught in 1939. But anyway, I mean, it's usually countries that feel weaker, they tend to accept, but it's upon us, right? And my criticism is it would never reach Ukraine. It's on us, whether we are supporting Ukraine enough so it can not only withstand, but also reclaim.
So, as Foreign Minister, you were a leading advocate for upholding human rights. It was reported this week that the Russian forces have committed more than 190,000 war crimes since the start of the full-scale invasion, and that Russia has a planned state policy of crimes against the Ukrainian people. What more do you think the international community could and should be doing?
We should put a lot more effort into the special tribunal that has been started in the Council of Europe. This is where this is the organization, the center from which the justice has to come, and we have to commit to it fully if we want to deter future aggressions from happening. Not just solve this one, but also future aggressions from happening.
And how did you personally feel when President Putin was invited went to Alaska for this meeting with Donald Trump, as he is a wanted war criminal?
Well, it's one of the darker pages of the modern history. I think it's. I can only imagine how it will look like in the pages of history. I don't think that it will be reflected well.
You said earlier that it was important that Ukraine was secured victory. Can you tell me how you see that victory? What is the outcome of war that you think has to be the target?
Well, I mean, many people talk about the diplomatic solutions to a war. I believe that all diplomatic solutions to any conflict start in the battlefield, right? So if you want Ukraine to be able to negotiate better conditions, after the war, that means that Ukraine has to be put in the strongest possible situation to negotiate it. And that situation comes from the battlefield, meaning that if Putin is on the retreat, if Putin is unable to hold the ground that he currently is holding, if he feels the pain from sanctions, if he feels the pain from burning oil refineries, then, Zelensky has much more power on the negotiating table. So I believe that is a goalpost that we cannot lose sight of. And, with any means that we need to get there, we need Ukraine to get there.
And is the objective, in your view, should it still be that Ukraine can reclaim all the land, including Crimea, that Russia has taken? And do you still think that is possible?
I do believe that it is possible. I've always believed that it is possible. All right, it's a matter of physics, right? So that means that we need to create we need to provide Ukraine with more equipment than Russians have. That is the way that it is all settled. But it's up to Ukraine to decide how they want to do it, and with which means. So if we are able, as I said previously, to provide Ukraine with enough so that they are stronger on the battlefield, much stronger on the battlefield than currently Russians are, that would then set the situation for any diplomatic solution that they would see fit.
You said earlier that you in Lithuania, you feel the threat from Russia much more keenly than other partners in Western Europe. Can you tell me what Lithuania has experienced?
Well, I would say probably that we've been on the forefront of the so-called hybrid Russian attacks. I don't like the name because it implies that we're not about to do anything, to counter that. But in Lithuania, those attacks started like 3 years ago. They were, very low intensity at the beginning. Then they escalated up to, arson attempts of the shopping malls, cable cutting that affected our, energy and just, national security interests. And it continues. Our airports were targeted. Now we're dealing with the air balloon attacks from Belarus, that do not allow our planes and airports to work properly. So I believe that this is the example of how Russians and its allies, are escalating the war into the wider European continent. And unfortunately, as I said, we have not yet found a way how to deal with it. And it provides also one of the points for anxiety, because it is escalating and we're still waiting. We're still dragging our feet.
Your grandfather, Vytautas, was the central political leader of Lithuania's peaceful break from the Soviet Union. How did he influence your understanding of and approach towards the geopolitical climate in Europe that influences you today?
Well, his position has always been that that Russia, after the 1990s, even though it lost the Cold War, it never conceded it never accepted the defeat. And that means that, in his view, Russia will try to reclaim what it thinks its zone of interest. That's why, we rushed to become part of NATO. That's why we've built up our defenses. And that's why we chose to warn the West that Russia is still a menace, despite the changing outlooks, despite the changing attitudes diplomatically. And some people considered him, a rather strong-minded, strong-willed, so to say, choosing strong words when it comes to Russia, especially, think 1995, 1999. But clearly he was right in most of his thinking, and that influenced not just me, but I think that a big part of the Lithuanian community.
And finally, to return to the start of our conversation, the recognition that you have won for your outstanding contribution to the global Magnitsky justice movement. What ambitions do you have for it, and how do you see your role going forward?
Well, to use my position, whichever that is, to continue the work. I don't think that that the fight is over. I think we are not out of the darkest of the night yet, and as long as Putin's Russia continues its war against Ukraine and against Ukraine's allies, we need to be vigilant, and we need to support those fighting against Russia. We need those who are under oppression, and we need not to forget that Russia is not the only oppressor or potential aggressor in the world. So that means that there are others who might need the support of people who care about the human rights and global rights, global fundamental rights of people.
Perhaps a conversation for another day, but there, we'll leave it for now. Thank you so much. It's been great talking to you, Gabrielius Landsbergis.
Thank you so much.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news or read it on thetimes.com. My thanks to our producer today, Louis Sykes, and to you for watching. Bye for now.